Have you ever taken a look at what a father is like in a sitcom from like the 80s or 90s and compared it to the fathers that are in modern day TV shows? There's a big difference in the role. You know, you end up seeing fathers from, just a couple of decades ago, and they were kind of what you think of when you think of the father figure. I think about Officer Winslow, from Family Matters with Steve Urkel and all that. You look at that character that was being played, and it was an individual that, sure, he had his flaws, and there was some comedic relief and everything, but you know what? He was someone who was assertive, and he was somebody who, kind of led his household. He was somebody who taught and provided boundaries, and, that led to, different situations with the characters in the show. But compare that type of father to a father in the show like Modern Family, who is, Phil Dunphy. He's dopey. He seems kind of aimless at times. He constantly has to be reeled in by all the other, more level-headed people in his life. And, this is just kind of one example, but this is actually a trend that a lot of people have studied, is the changing role of fathers in the household. And what so many people have actually ended up finding is that you see people playing off a father for jokes because the father has become an accessory. The father doesn't play that same role that he's played in the past, and so many households are having to go without fathers altogether. And so as a result, you see in pop culture fathers either being completely written out of the script or being put in as just kind of a side character because, after all, it's just the dad. But is that actually the case? You see, the father actually plays a very critical role. There is a group that I was looking up research with, and it was, trying to look at what the impact was of having that father character in the household. And you ended up seeing all kinds of interesting, like empirically proven things, households that have fathers, I think it's something like 33% more likely to get A's in school, and they're significantly less likely to be held back a grade. The rates of, individuals who end up being either incarcerated or end up having, different kinds of rates of clinical depression or anything like this are so much higher for those households that don't have a father figure. And while there's many different things that go into those particular issues, a father isn't the magic bullet that's going to fix everything, it does go to show you that having a father in the household does have an impact on children in a way that only a father can do. And I'm not trying to say that to be chauvinistic or anything like that, because I would tell you the exact same thing about a mother, that fathers can't, sit here and do things that mothers can do in the lives of their children. We're just kind of geared a little differently. It's something that I become very painfully aware of anytime I try to do something like decorate something or anything that involves any kind of organization. Meredith is way better at that than I am. We're just kind of different people, and you can see it in our parenting as well. Meredith is very nurturing, and I tend to provide boundaries. There's different roles that you end up seeing taking place, and even though we don't do it perfectly at all, it is something that we try to draw inspiration from what we see played out in the Bible. And there is something you see played out in the Bible that goes beyond just kind of stereotypical whatever gender roles. You see that a father is geared in a certain way and plays a certain role in the household. One of the ways that you can end up seeing this played out is just in how God treats us as his children. Now, it's not an accident that God uses this family metaphor in order to describe his relationship to us, our relationship to each other, and Christ's relationship to his church. That's what we've been talking about for the past several weeks. But in a very literal sense, God is a father, and he provides fatherly things to us. Here in just a moment in your small groups, you're going to take a look at one example of where God is described as the father, and you're going to see the way in which he acts as the father, especially as that pertains to tough love. Because life throws things at us, and sometimes God saves us from those tough times, and sometimes he doesn't. He allows those things to happen. But there's instruction inside of those trials. There's things that we can learn in areas where we can grow, and in many ways we can see some fatherly-like characteristics in how God treats us through those hard times. So take a look at that in your small groups, and whenever you come back, we're going to see how that hard love can actually become something that becomes very powerful when it's mixed with a sense of love and compassion. Assertiveness, when done correctly, can actually be a very powerful thing, and powerful in a very good way. In our society, we tend to look at assertiveness, in particular kind of the male variety of assertiveness, and we tend to look at it as a very negative thing. People will call it things like toxic and whatnot. And I think what this ends up doing is it actually ends up driving a greater amount of disparity in how men act. You see, you have some people who probably truly are toxic, and they hear that and just simply out of rebellion pull even to a greater extreme than they previously were, becoming more toxic. But then you have individuals who want to do right, and they hear that, and maybe they're not really being toxic at all, and they start hanging back and being less assertive and less assertive. And before you know it, what you have the worst among us being even worse, and then you have those who are trying to do well failing to actually step up to the responsibilities that they have, being the men in the lives of their children and in their household. But, that assertiveness, even though it is critical and it's something that needs to be reintroduced into our households, it can't just simply be a father being a prosecutor and a judge and an executioner. That's not at all what we see happening when we see the model of a father, when we see what it takes to actually lead and build up these small, impressionable minds. What we see when we see a loving father as a husband in a household. No, instead what we actually see is somebody who is like a teacher. They provide that guidance. They provide that knowledge of what it is needs to take place. You see the mentor, the individual who's going to come in as somebody who is wiser, who's kind of walked these different phases of life and can help guide their children as they grow up. And you see someone who's like a coach, somebody that I think of as, providing kind of that corrective action, not corrective because it's a punitive punishment like an executioner, but instead providing corrective action that helps to build somebody up, to train them for what the world needs them to be. So what you end up seeing is assertiveness being paired with love and compassion and an interest in purely the best for their children. And when you put those two things together, it could really become something amazing. Consider this as you go into your small groups here in just a moment. The words discipline and disciple are very close, and that's not by accident. Anybody who's studied language knows that these words have common roots. And what I want you to think about is this. If discipline is not just punitive punishment, then what does it mean to execute discipline in your household in such a way that it is actually discipling? If last week we extolled and put up on a pedestal a mother's love, this week what we're talking about is a father's word. And a father's word is important because that is the truth in the lives of our children. The reason why a father in a household means so much is because the father is there to provide that level of healthy assertiveness, that discipline that leads to discipleship, that guidance that helps an individual be ready to take on whatever the world wants to throw at them. A father can play that role, and when it's done correctly, it can really be a beautiful thing. We've lost that in this society because the world just has so many different things it wants to talk about when it comes to being a father or a man or anything like that. I don't want to talk about any of that right now because I just want to focus on the main thing. And the main thing is that our kids need father figures in their lives. Whether that is the biological father, whether that is a stepfather, whether that is a grandfather, whether that is just another individual in their lives who can provide that fatherly-like guidance. Our kids need fathers because our kids need truth, just as our kids need nurturing love, and just as our kids need a support system around them to help build them up. So critical to the family are having all these components that we end up seeing held up in the Bible. Children that listen and are an active part of their parents' guidance. Mothers that nurture and that care. And fathers who are willing and who are able to actually lay out and help motivate and mentor truth in the lives of our children. All these things are important. So the question is, what role do you play? Because I assure you, there are children everywhere in our lives. what can we do to help better prepare them for what this world is going to try to challenge them with? That's our lesson we have for you today. I hope you're able to get something out of it. Until we can meet again, God bless.